Welcome to Hash It Out, a podcast built by data security experts. We decipher the data security landscape through honest conversations about today's headlines and tomorrow's challenges. Brought to you by Virtru. Let's dive in.
In this episode of Hash It Out, we chat with Dan Nicolaiza, Solutions Architect Manager at Abnormal AI, and Ryan Ogden, Senior Director of Information Security at Spot On, to gain insight on how innovative organizations are combining Virtru and Abnormal AI products to move beyond legacy email, creating a powerful data protection that supports modern and efficient collaboration.
Alrighty, let's do this. So for those of you watching, welcome to another edition of Virtru's Hash It Out series. My name is Trevor Foskett. If you've tuned into these series before, you may have seen or heard me. So happy to be back here doing another one of these. I lead the pre-sales solutions engineering team here at Virtru, and I'm joined by not one but two special guests today who will go ahead and have introduced themselves now. So Dan, why don't you go ahead and let the viewers know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Nicolaiza. I'm a solutions architect at Abnormal AI. Recently moved into a management role. But fundamentally, what my day-to-day opportunities have been for the last several years that I've been here has been helping organizations migrate away from third-party secure email gateways to leverage the native email gateway built into Microsoft or Google, and then obviously complemented or supplemented by Abnormal. So anyway, a bit about me, and I'll kick it over to Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm Ryan Ogden. I lead the information security function and team here at Spot On. And for those of you unaware, Spot On is a restaurant technology company. So we're in the same space as the Clover, the Stripe, the Toast, taking on the technology needs for restaurants in the food and beverage industry. And my day-to-day is overseeing the enterprise security functions for the business and the security of our products that we sell and make available to our merchants and customers.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. So interesting set of characters here today. We have, Dan is from another security vendor at Abnormal, who kind of we think of as being a complement to what we do here at Virtru. We're interested in securing your data as you share it outbound. Abnormal really concerned about protecting you from threats that are coming from outside and moving in. So Ryan is in a unique position of being a customer of both of ours. So Ryan, thanks times two for joining us today. And I guess the big question that probably a lot of people are asking is, and the title of our session today being Beyond the SEG, Beyond the Secure Email Gateway, inbound and outbound, why two solutions? Why are you customers of both of ours? Why didn't you just go get something that does it all?
Great question. Well, for some reason, we're 40 or 50 years into the world of email, and it's still a big deal. So, which is kind of crazy in a lot of ways. But for us, the landscape of email security has been, it's evolved, it's changed, it's done all sorts of crazy stuff over the last 30, 40 plus years. And for us, and me specifically, what I needed was something that was pretty hands-off, but had a high degree of efficacy and was able to adapt to the landscape. I think the rate of change in the security landscape is just it's increasing every single year. So for us, keeping inbound against our business, we also are a payments company to some degree. So for us, it's really important to have that protection layer there. And then for the outbound side, we provide and build and support technology for restaurants in the food and beverage industry. And so we do a lot of communications with our merchants who are our customers. So think restaurant owners, bar managers, people that own coffee shops, and really large restaurant chains. And they have very unique needs that are specific to their business. So it was really important for us to have a nice, seamless, trusted way for us to exchange some of that information, and make sure that they were able to adapt to it, we could adapt to it, and not have to go through 1,000 hurdles just to try to learn how to do technology. So for us, it made a lot of sense to kind of handle it in both senses with a nice, secure inbound product, and then something that allows us to do those secure comms with our customers.
Fantastic. Dan, I saw you come off mute there. I'm gonna jump ahead of you, but actually ask you a question. Ryan talked a lot about this evolving threat landscape, and I was hoping maybe as the expert in the space on inbound threats, you could tell us a little bit about the state of play today? What are the threats, and how are they advancing, and how do you guys tackle that?
No, yeah, great question. I was actually coming off you to maybe ask Brian about a couple of specific use cases he's seen, but from a prompt perspective and kind of going from there, just to that point, I'll say that a little bit more on my background. I've been doing email security for about the last 10 years. And even just in that last 10 years, so many things have shifted. Back when I first joined at a third-party email gateway company a number of years ago, a lot of the threats were really simple, like link-based threats, like click here, I'm immediately brought to a phishing page, or there might be a malware download at the other end of that click. When it comes to link-based, threats, what a lot of what I see nowadays is you're going to have messages where the initial URL will point to an entirely legitimate service. That could be like a Canva, an Adobe, a SharePoint, a OneDrive, or some legitimate website that has been kind of compromised or is being abused. And then it requires oftentimes multiple points of human interaction to like click on another link, solve a captcha, maybe perform some character entry before I can eventually get my credentials stolen. Or some of the other trends that we see is rather than stealing credentials in the traditional sense, we have, link-based threats that are trying to install OAuth applications into like a user's Office 365 or Google account. And so what we've seen is that the level of obfuscation, the level of the number of points of like human interaction, human verification that are taking place have kind of, grown exponentially over the past, 10 years, if you want to think of it that way. And it's kind of gotten to a point where, from my perspective, with especially link-based threats, I can't rely on strictly doing kind of payload analysis in that traditional sense of like put a link in a sandbox, click on it, see what would end up happening to the end user. And so that's what we see from like a link perspective. The other big increase that we've seen is going to be in that broader term of what you refer to as business email compromise. And so whether those are things like simple name impersonations, or if you're actually talking about third-party compromise, and that third-party compromise being used to either send link-based threats, for example, or attachment-based threats, or items that don't contain a payload, and they're just trying to seek some sort of financial gain, like misdirecting an upcoming invoice payment or things of that nature. Those are really the two broad themes that I've seen, is again, kind of more complicated link-based threats, and then this really, really heavy emphasis and push for business email compromise. And especially in that world of business email compromise, things that don't necessarily have a payload, but are just trying to steal money from organizations. Those are the two kind of biggest trends I've seen over my career, at least. But anyway, not sure, Ryan, if there's anything to mention there, but just a couple of quick overviews on that front.
Yeah, no, I mean, you covered it, right? That is the landscape changing. It's changed from more of a reactive mindset to more of a very proactive evolution inside of that versus just, we already know this is bad, so therefore we'll write a signature for it. We're moved far beyond that in the email landscape today.
Ryan, it sounds like, you gave us a little bit of overview of what your business model looks like. And it sounds like, you're reaching out to restaurants, bars, cafes, suppliers, etc. And so I imagine you're getting inbound emails from a lot of different sources every day, Gmail addresses, Yahoo addresses, I bet, things that kind of have this kind of invoicing stuff that Dan talked about, but it's legitimate for you guys. And so is that part of, your risk management profile, thinking about, we need to be able to sort out what's real and what's fake in that respect, because some of them are legit and some aren't. And is that something that Abnormal helps you with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about anybody that's got, Comcast or Gmail or whatever it is, right, for their email. I mean, that is their business email. That's not, we're not a B2B kind of a company in that sense where we can rely on, at, I don't know, Abnormal or at Cloudflare or Cisco or something, right? We're relying on consumer grade email patterns to run some of our business with our merchants, right? So we can't afford to get super stringent on internal corporate style mail security when that same practice, that same level of control needs to also address the coffee shop owner in a town in the middle of Kansas or something, right? So if we block those, if we don't allow those to come in, if we miss exchanges around potential new customers or trying to maybe troubleshoot and respond to a support issue with a current merchant, it doesn't just impact our business, it really impacts our merchants, and that's their livelihood. So we've got a really hard balance of saying, hey, we got to protect the CFO or the, somebody who's getting targeted off of a LinkedIn campaign, just as much as we got to make sure that that email gets delivered from the cafe owner, and make sure that we're able to support their business along with ours and not compromise one way or the other. It's a pretty hard balance, but it's something we've seen a lot of success with Abnormal.
And if I can just make one more comment on that topic and maybe just pontificate for just a second. When I first came across Abnormal kind of in the wild, I was actually working at a value-added reseller, and got brought in to do a forensics investigation on an accountant who had wired $300,000, we found out later, to a threat actor. So they kind of contacted me / us, Update 31, and said, hey, we just found out that this payment's delinquent. We wired $300,000 to somebody, but it wasn't the vendor that we were trying to pay. And so, as we kicked off that forensics investigation, as we started looking into that, I was like, I don't think that this accountant did this like knowingly necessarily. I said, there's this interesting tech company I just heard from called Abnormal Security at the time, now Abnormal AI. And I was like, if their technology works as advertised, they should be able to identify, even though this has happened previous to our engagement here, they should be able to identify that, oh yeah, there was a compromised external party that sent you these kind of updated bank account details to pay. And so, Ryan, I was just going to say, like, that balance of like those types of messages that don't really have a payload, and like in that context, like if I just get a PDF with updated bank account details, aside from the context of that message, there's nothing malicious about it in that traditional sense. And I'll just say, like, that use case of like contextual based detection, especially things that don't have a payload in that traditional sense, is one of the primary reasons why I joined Abnormal 4.5 years ago. And glad to hear that you've had success with us as well. That's always good for me to hear.
300K, that's a little bit more severe than the classic, hey, can you go buy a few $100 of Amazon gift cards? So there's real consequences here, it sounds like. Want to shift for a second, Ryan. We talked a lot about the inbound. You guys have to communicate with folks all over the country, it sounds like. What factor did that play into thinking about how you would share data with them on the flip side and moving outbound? I imagine a lot of these folks don't have an encryption solution on their end. They don't have an IT team. So how did you kind of approach that when thinking about it?
Yeah, you're right on all of that. They have an iPhone and a laptop, and that's what they do, right? And so for us, it started with how does spot on work? What's our processes that are used, and who's really in scope for those situations where we have to securely exchange contract information, banking information, financial information, business IDs that are sensitive, things that contain things like social security numbers and tax IDs. We've got to make sure that we're doing that in a way that isn't just secure. Secure is done. You can do secure. That's not the challenge. Isn't doing this here. The challenge is actually doing it across a landscape that is as frictionless as you can possibly do. And so we've got, the teams inside the business that have to exchange this kind of information. How do they work? We started with that. What are your problems? What are some of the use cases where you've encountered some really upset customers because we are trying to do the right thing? They don't like how we're trying to do it. I don't know. So there's a learning experience that needs to go through first, right? That's part of the journey. Is we can solve anything. There's no shortage of companies that do things these days, but what we have to do is find the right one that fits the right way we as our business pivots, right? So we started with that, and then we started to understand the landscape of what's going on, and then where we could go apply the concept of security inside of that information. And like, to much to my earlier point, it's still done via email. Like, that is still the medium of communicating in the world today, through some sort of proposed business engagement or interaction or scheduling or something. Like it's still done through email on such a volume. So for us, it was finding something that was frictionless, something that could be very easily approached, and most importantly, approached by someone who's not technical. They don't want to know how the bits work. They just want it to work. So that's what kind of landed us in the world of Virtru, was say, hey, we got this inbound thing covered. What we don't have is a nice seamless way for someone, whether they're on a laptop, whether they're on a phone, they just got to send a contract, or maybe they need to respond to an email that has that contract in it. And we want them to do it through a much more secure and traceable manner. And that's where we landed on Virtru, because it helped us achieve all of that. And we didn't have to spend hours and hours writing docs, or I guess having AI write the doc, of how does this work? We don't want to spend time on how things work. We're trying to get stuff actually done. And it met all those marks. And we've had a really, really good relationship so far with the platform and our customers. We haven't really had any complaints that I'm aware of. I'm gonna add the asterisk on that I'm aware of, but nothing's boiled over. It's my team runs it, we manage it, and we engage with it, and we've heard minimal to no issues at all from our customers or our internal employees.
Awesome. Love to hear it. I want to get both your guys' perspectives on this. The session today is called Beyond the SEG, and I think both of you guys are yourselves beyond the SEG, right? Dan, you have experience working at a SEG vendor, and Ryan, I think you guys have used secure email gateways in the past. So maybe Dan first, tell me a little bit about why something like Abnormal was more attractive to you than the traditional way of doing things. And Ryan, would love to hear from you as well on, was there a compelling event that made you say, look, we gotta think about this differently?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'll just say, from my perspective, one of the things that I'll say is, like, every organization on the planet has some sort of secure email gateway that might be platform native to, like, Microsoft or Google Workspace, or it could be a third party like a Cisco, Mimecast, Proofpoint, Barracuda, those folks, right? And it's what's been interesting for me to see, and eventually coming to Abnormal, one of the big frustrations that I had when I was at a previous employer, before I was at that bar, and then before, and then ultimately came here, is like, you kind of end up with this gap in detection that I always refer to as like the last 1%. And so it's like everybody's using an email gateway, but when you look at threat trends, it's like, yeah, 90% plus of breaches are starting with an email. We've lost over $50 billion to business email compromise since 2013, just on what the FBI is tracking. And it's like, why is this happening? We all have email gateways, right? And some of them are best of breed. And what we start seeing is like, yeah, this little 1% of stuff that initially sneaks through, it looks like a really small bit of data, like kind of at a spreadsheet level, right? But the impact of this stuff is crazy. This is where we're losing money. This is how breaches are starting. And so when I came across Abnormal, that was kind of my first thought, is like, there's this class of messages, this last 1%, the most novel threat techniques that are happening even with more traditional payloads, or those items that lack a payload. And it's like, I can't get my email gateway to necessarily detect this stuff consistently without creating a bunch of false positives and other operational work for me. And so when we talk about Abnormal coming in, it's like, yeah, that last 1, 2, 3, 4% of unwanted and malicious messages that initially sneak through. Abnormal's whole point is to say, let's just give you an outcome. Let's detect and mitigate the risk of that last 1%. And to Ryan's point, we hope that is very hands-off and something that is very easy to do, and you can just consume an outcome from us. That's really what drew me to Abnormal, is kind of addressing that last 1%, because again, relative to the threat landscape, we all have email gateways, but email is still the most prevalent threat vector and most successful threat vector. So that's kind of the way that I look at it from my perspective.
Yeah, and on being on the customer side of that solution and some of the other solutions historically, everything you said pretty much landed with my experience and my history with responsibility over mail security. And years ago, what was considered the IT team was the email team, right? And that the newer companies that are a little bit more decentralized don't generally operate that way, and so security ends up being, quote unquote, the email team, and we're trying to not be the email team. However, we do have some skin in the game and like to understand what's going on, because the threat landscape is so big and so deep. So for me, it was a combination. It was, I'm fine being the email security team, but I'm not going to be the email team. I don't personally, like, spam is not a concern to me. Spam is, that's other issues, right? So like for me, it was block the bad. Don't worry about the newsletters and things like that aren't tied to campaigns or malicious. So I wanted something that was pretty hands off. I wanted something where I wasn't constantly trying to, dial in certain things or tweak or twist a knob or, figure out the difference between this and that, and then hope and pray and spend a lot of time on, testing this thing out and stuff. I don't want my teams to be spending time on that. I want the business to be secure. I want my teams to let the solution do the heavy lifting, and then we report on it. And then most importantly, the efficacy rate. Yeah, there has to be a high degree of efficacy. And as the threat landscape was evolving, and years ago, I started seeing the same gaps. I started seeing certain patterns that were being channeled through email were having a tough time being identified with some of the more signature driven approaches, some of the more legacy style of mail security. And it wasn't, in my opinion, things weren't evolving as fast on the detection side as they were on the offense side. And that's not all that common. They're usually playing catch up. However, this is a pretty important game to not play catch up all the time. So I wanted something that was at least staying at pace, maybe a little ahead every now and then. And so light touch, high degree of efficacy. I'll report on it when I need to, but it just kind of does what it needs to do and allows my teams to really go focus on doing the security work for the business while this thing is kind of operating and augmenting my team with a tech stack that constantly stays updated with some of the newer campaign patterns. And then I guess to add one more thing in that, some of the struggles that I had historically with some of the, like you mentioned, like Google, Microsoft, yeah, they are to some degree their own gateways. It's always been a challenge to get visibility into the qualities, I guess, or the telemetry of a message as to why it may be categorized as something or whatever the thing is. They don't really offer that up. It's not super identifiable. And I think the first time I ever even saw the abnormal during a POC, I was able to see all the markers inside the language, why the markers contributed to that being considered, I don't know, financial or wire or imposter or whatever it is. That allowed us to give confidence back to the business should there be an impact on delivery. If somebody was claiming, why was this constantly getting blocked, or maybe the other side of that, right? We were able to speak to it. And historically, that was just not a thing. We kind of had a deer in the headlights. Well, we're doing the best we can. We went off of this. So that was a real nice turning point for me to be able to speak to certain things and give some confidence back to the business. And, why are we spending money on this? Why is it better than that or this? It's because I'll be able to tell you whether or not that was in fact not from PayPal or something like that. So that all of those things combined really added up to the decision making for me.
Yeah. So to unpack that a little bit, it sounds like there is a couple of things you described on one end of the spectrum here. There's a ton of administration associated with some of these things, dialing in your rules for both inbound and I imagine rules for outbound too. We're going to protect a message if XYZ is included in the subject line, and how do we eliminate false positives? But on the other hand, you also described this concept that I think we hear from both admins and end users alike, which is there's also this component of it that's a bit of a black box. Whether it's inbound, I don't know why that message got flagged, or outbound, it got, encrypted or sent to the portal. Again, I'm not really sure why, or didn't even know that it happened as an end user.
Right.
So it sounds like you're getting a little bit more visibility now without that requirement to just be constantly dialing knobs, both putting a little bit more control in the user's hands. For the outbound side, you guys have, everybody loves the Virtru button. And then on the inbound side, you can actually point to, hey, here's why this message was flagged, and help people understand that. So totally makes sense. I think we're coming up on time here. I know Dan's got to jump. Ryan, I know you're busy as well. Any final notes that you guys want to throw out there on this topic of, beyond the SEG and maybe thinking about more modern ways to approach these both inbound and outbound email security requirements?
Yeah, I think for me, it starts with transparency and knowing what your business is doing and how it works. And I think that has always been a problem. It will always kind of be part of the challenge. And maybe I should say it's always been part of the challenge, right? But I think it's gotten more challenging, especially if you get outside of the regulated industries. you really need to know, technology teams need to know how the business is working. And long gone are some of those days where the business always funneled back through some central team of stuff. That's not that common these days. So I think it's important to know what are the requirements for the business. What's the business trying to achieve, and understand, the landscape of cyber and risk around business continuity type of mindsets. Like, we're talking risk here. So how much risk are you willing to absorb or not absorb around very common problematic channels like email? Are you willing to take a chance that, things might squeak through, or do you want to like really invest and dip your toes in the water of much more, I guess, less traditional approaches to security? My experience has been really good. It's not guaranteed everybody's going to do that, but I think you have to try. And the other thing that I've really built some confidence around was a lot of the solutions are built to just snap right in. They're not some of the more legacy things. So you can snap it in, and if for whatever the reason is that particular thing doesn't work the way you want it to, it's just as easy to unsnap it. So I think we have to get out of the mindset of we shouldn't be taking some risks. And I think calculated risks are part of this, because otherwise the landscape is going to continue to change. And if you don't try to stay up with it, there's going to be a point where there's an event where it really shines a light that you're not staying in parity with that. And so I think it's okay to take some of these calculated risks and chances, and talk to people in your circle, your CISO circles, or whatever it is. See what they're doing. Everybody kind of wants to know who's doing what and what they should maybe be looking at. So that would be my advice.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Ryan.
No, and yeah, I'll just say
the countdown said we might be over, but I think we're still good. So go ahead, Dan.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to be brief. But I kind of mentioned like that last 1% of like, bad stuff that initially slips through. This is why email's still so prevalent. And one of the things that, just from an abnormal perspective, and kind of my perspective as someone who has deeply studied and continues to deeply study this industry and the threat landscape, is like, we kind of exist in a world where more and more there are so many different components of, if we're talking just about email, like an email threat, so many of those components are abusing, legitimate services, legitimate email accounts, etc., that realistically the only way we can detect, this last 1% of messages, it's based on contextual indicators. We need to understand, deeply understand email behavior, human behavior, so that we can identify this last 1% of messages. And Ryan, to the point that you made, it's like when we talk about things like definition, signatures, threat intel, it's like, that's great. I'm going to block 99% of everything that's unwanted and malicious. Those have been defined, those have been discovered, etc. When we talk about that last 1%, the best way that you can detect that initially is through deep contextual understanding. And that's the approach that Abnormal tries to take to this space, to say, let's understand the context in which this message was sent so that we can then properly analyze it and make a decision on it. And it's going beyond those things that are known, those signatures, those definitions. And you mentioned one thing that kind of just stood out to me too, is like the idea of like a black box. And I recall back to like some of my days at the bar, and even some of the stuff that I see here when I'm helping organizations migrate away from that third-party gateway, is like, yeah, I might have a message and it's like, oh yeah, we caught this because we had a spam score of like 90 on the message. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, cool, a spam score of 90, that's awesome. One of the things I've enjoyed about Abnormal is like, we are giving you kind of a peek under the covers of like, what are those contextual anomalies that we're looking for? Like, this came from an atypical sender, or maybe it's a known sender, but they don't normally use this display name, for example. Those are the types of things we're looking for, those small contextual anomalies to say something doesn't quite seem right here. And this would be after those signatures, definitions, threat intelligence have already taken a look at that message. But anyway, that's kind of where I will end it for now.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, you guys both mentioned something that I think dovetails together. I mean, you're talking about the context, Dan, and Ryan, you mentioned, one of the big things for you was understanding your business and understanding what type of data you have and the requirements there. And I think that's huge. When we think about our most successful customers at Virtru, they have a vision of where they are and where they want to be, and an understanding of the types of data they deal with, whether it's for a compliance framework or just, we think we should be doing better, but we need to protect this data for these reasons. I think if you have that understanding of your business, it allows you to go out and find solutions like a Virtru, like an Abnormal, instead of just saying, well, we just need to get a secure email gateway and then we're good with all of our data. But if you have that better, deeper understanding, you can start applying solutions that are actually going to make sense for what it is you're trying to do. So with that, I will cut it here. I think you guys both need to have somewhere else to be, so I appreciate you sticking over with us a little bit here. Ryan, Dan, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Virtru's Hash It Out series, and I'd love to have you back sometime to keep the discussion going.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a 5-star review, and don't miss us the next time we hash it out. Like, follow, and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, all linked below.